Hey, listen, we're talking this show about tariffs, global unrest, and AI. Listen, I know there's a lot of conversation out there about what you can do, how you can make money, what you should be prepared for. A lot of people are using the term tariffs as a way to kind of talk about, well, quite honestly, some businesses, even though they're even selling things that aren't affected by tariffs, are using it as a way to profit even more than they ordinarily would. So make sure that you're aware of that. But in addition to that, we want to talk about what's actually happening, what has occurred, what is currently occurring, and what our expectations are in the future. And right now, as we're chatting, the S&P is around all-time highs. Here's the good news. The good news is there's always opportunity. You've heard me say before, I've said lots, that money doesn't go away, it just moves. So we want to be in a place where we're paying attention to where money is moving. I've actually asked Dalton Helvey, he's the senior portfolio manager at U.S. Private Wealth, also an advisor for years, to join us in this conversation so we can discuss some things that I believe are going to be absolutely beneficial to you as you're watching and listening. So Dalton, thanks for taking a minute.
Absolutely.
And joining us on the show. So let's talk initially about right now markets. We're kind of mid-year markets as we're shooting this. Markets that are all-time highs. Obviously, there's conversation about the interest rate and Fed, and who knows whether they'll continue to stay on path as we continue to move into the fall or not. I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of desire for them to reduce rates at this point. So what are your thoughts as far as market outlook?
There's definitely a lot of desire on Trump's end, I can tell you that. But yes, it's definitely the expectations there on cutting interest rates has definitely decreased. They were anticipating they were coming out beginning of the year 4 or 5, interest rate cuts. That's now reduced down to maybe 2 end of the year if we have that. So there's a lot of things on the interest rate side that they're kind of waiting for.
Dalton, that reminds me, I got to say it, that reminds me of the old adage of good from far, but far from good. You're looking at somebody, you're like, that looks good. And then you get closer, you're like, ooh, not so good. So is it a tease? Was it just a tease from the Fed? Hey, this is what we're thinking about doing? Or was it just, you think they generally weren't sure?
I think they generally weren't sure. And I think that is in big part to a lot of the things that came from COVID. Still a lot of after effects that came from that, trying to get the economy back on track. I think they're very picky when it comes to inflation and really what numbers they're looking at, in terms of excluding, volatile things like housing and energy. I really think you have to take a closer look at really what is moving the needle in terms of inflation. So I don't think they predicted things correctly. And I wouldn't agree with the sentiment.
I totally agree. I think they need to reduce rates. I think it's time. I think there is enough sentiment of stability. I think costs have gone down. Obviously, the drill baby drill has worked. We've seen prices of oil go down. Our strategic reserves are being reserved again. There's a lot of things that are happening. The economic engine, we got trillions of dollars that are coming into America, regardless of what the news says. There's trillions of dollars from companies in other countries that are literally coming into America for economic development. Now, obviously, that doesn't necessarily affect the society and the economy like immediately, right? There's some emotional lift that happens in the market, but it's not going to be 6, 8, 10, 12 years out. That's the good news. Like Trump's not stupid. These deals that he's signing are going to be within a couple of years where the economic impact really is felt.
Absolutely. And we knew going into his presidency that it was going to take some time in order for some of these things to get back on pace in terms of the economy overall, with some of the new tariffs that have come into place, really repositioning ourselves as the global leader in terms of being, the strongest currency, number one. So that's another thing. So I think that these are all things that are going to take a little bit of time, but like you said, once the economy starts to get back on track, we'll really be in a place where we can move from a place of strength as opposed to a place of weakness, which is where we were before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's talk about tariffs. Obviously, there's been a lot of countries immediately when Trump took office, and then he imposed tariffs rather quickly right after that happened. And there was a lot of countries that literally were ready to step up and say, hey, let's do this. Obviously, there's a lot of conversations about Canada, and he was joking around about another state, all that goes with that. But, there's negotiation and things happening, which I think are beneficial. And quite honestly, a side note again, listen, I really think it's beneficial because the U.S. has been ripped off for years. Unfortunately, a lot of people that are looking at the numbers and looking at the data, or even just looking at TV, don't really have any idea what's happening. It's not that they're bad people, they just haven't studied the facts. And so when you study the facts and you look at things, you say, wow, we have really been taken advantage of as a country for a while. So this is absolutely needed, a cleansing in a lot of ways, if you will. But let's talk about what's happened. Again, a lot of countries have come to the table. and what is yet to come from your perspective?
Yeah, well, obviously we started off with a lot of high tariffs, especially for China. That was a big one. And China is still kind of the lingering one that's out there, right? There's supposed to be a trade deal.
And remember, Kevin O'Leary said he's in favor of 300 to 400% tariffs.
Yes.
Right out of the gate, which he shared that on media several times. And I'm like, that makes sense to me.
Which I think is appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, based on some of the things. There's other things at play that people don't see, from the competition between AI trying to really become the world leader there.
Yeah.
That just aren't factored in when people really look at the numbers. And so there's other things at play. That goes for most of the things when they hear about politics or other things and bills being passed, that we're just not privy to, right? And there's certain things out there where we're going to be in a place where we're really trying to establish our dominance over China over the next 20, 30 years in terms of technology. AI is a big one. So there's more at play than just the economic numbers that are coming in. And so China still remains the one that's the number one on the table when it comes to the highest in terms of tariffs.
And there's been no final negotiation that's been reached,
Correct.
essentially, with them either at this point.
The reciprocal tariffs, right? Some of those tariffs that were imposed are actually going to be falling off. The timeline there is July 6th is the ETA on that. So that's when some of those are going to be falling off. And I think we're moving in the right direction now that a lot of those other countries have come to the table, and we're finally in a place where we can get back on track with some of these, random countries, countries, that are in Eastern Asia, things like that, that just have not been productive at all to overall our economy and our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so lopsided as far as the amount that we have to pay versus they pay, which is when you look at it, and when you think about it, Dalton, it's interesting to me. A lot of people look at this and they're like, oh my gosh, this has been going on forever. Of course, we live in a society where it's literally knee-jerk and people are, they're living today, they forget yesterday, they move to tomorrow. It's like they have no idea. We have so much information coming at us. But if you look at this from a logistical perspective, we're shooting this show mid-June, and here we are. We're several months into the Trump presidency where these tariffs have been taking place, if you will. We're talking about negotiating with countries for supply and trade. Like, these are massive negotiated deals. And when you think about it, most people, if they're in a place, Dalton, if they were going to sell their own home, right? They're going to put their home on the market. They put their home on the market. They list it for a particular price. Let's say it's $2 million. And now all of a sudden somebody comes in, they want to buy the house. They're going to lowball them. They got to find the middle ground, that middle price. It's not uncommon for people to think about, they put their home in the market and it's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7, 8 months to sell their home. And we're literally talking about negotiating supply and trade with other countries on the planet. And we're a couple months in and we're really making a lot of headways. I'm just saying, like, how are people not looking at this? Why can't they, from your perspective, why can't people step away from the noise of media and understand the kind of brevity of the weight of this and say, these are massive negotiations that in a lot of ways benefit other countries and not us. And we finally have somebody standing up to this so we can have a fair fight. It's almost like being next to a neighbor and you're sharing on the same electrical grid, and you pay a bill and they pay a bill, but you pay 80% of their bill because you have a bigger house. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So what are your thoughts as far as why people can't step away and actually, logically look at the facts here?
I think it's partly due to the culture that we have here in the U.S. Everyone's an expert on everything, right? And that's especially even more so with the advance of technology and the internet, being able to look anything up and, after reading the Google, AI transcript, you have it all figured out.
Yeah.
Essentially. So,
well, it's amazing how many professionals, I'm not saying don't use AI, there's a lot of benefits to it, but Dalton, I mean, we've seen it even in our space, in the financial space, other professionals that have used AI in different ways for different terminologies and definitions and research and things. And it's only pulling from what's out there.
That's true.
You may not necessarily pull information that's specific to what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And there's, so you really have to look at it as, not everybody is going to be, obviously in the know on what's going on with all these different complicated trade negotiations. And you got to focus on, when it comes to investing, really cutting through the noise and seeing what the overall goal is in mind.
Let's talk real quick about supply chain, right? And some of the companies that are going to struggle a little bit with supply chain. and then the idea of onshoring versus reshoring, the importance of made in America now. What are your thoughts as far as some of the companies out there that are going to struggle a little bit with supply chain issues? Cost really is what it is because of the tariffs. It's not that they can and can't support or, deploy, but who's going to struggle with that in your opinion?
Well, so there's the big names out there, Apple, kind of those companies that are, manufacturing a lot over in China and places like that. So there's definitely going to be a struggle there when it comes to tech, and the focus really needs to be on, which companies are going to avoid a lot of the supply chain constraints in the short term. In the long term, I think this is going to be a great beneficial thing because a lot of those companies are going to have to rethink how they're manufacturing.
Well, and to that end, we've seen some companies that are, originally doing business in China and going and making negotiations in India.
Yeah.
And saying, well, we can manufacture here cheaper sometimes. Oftentimes it's a better quality product and we don't have to deal with some of the same issues.
Sure.
So that's an example of a company pivoting.
Absolutely. Trump he understands that because he's a businessman himself. So he understands being in a place where a company needs to produce something, manufacture something, and they need to do so where they're operating in profit. And if they want to increase those margins, fantastic. But the good news is you can do that also here in the US and also still be profitable.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And we talk about the idea of some of the global unrest that's happening today, Dalton. I want to talk real quick about Israel. Some of the tensions that are there. We saw crude go up over $100 a barrel for a short period. What's your thoughts as far as, obviously we have a lot more drilling. There's a lot more online now that used to be, but what's your thoughts as far as the price of oil, how this kind of global unrest is going to affect the economy in general?
Sure. Well, I think when it comes to oil, we're really in a place where, not only from drilling here domestically, but also a lot of the offshore drilling. Trump opened up a lot of the offshore drilling that's now going to be available. And that's going to be a huge benefit for us here in the US. So I really think when we're looking at oil and gas, we're in a place where we're establishing our dominance again as a country. Whereas before we were pulling from reserves, and we weren't really in a place where, we were producing like we could. And so I think that, given what's happened in the Middle East, even as of recent, that's even more so of a catalyst to be bullish on oil and gas.
So there's a lot of conversation out there, Dalton, about, Palantir being it's gone up 100%.
Yes.
As the time we're shooting this. I think it's a little bit overvalued in my opinion, but that's where it is. And then in addition, this whole Stargate thing, massive infrastructure project that's going to be I think change indefinitely the way we do things in a lot of ways. But let's talk about that Palantir a little bit. They've been taking advantage of a lot of different things, obviously in the AI space. What are your thoughts about? Do you believe it's overvalued? There's a lot of sentiment out there. What are your thoughts?
There are certain things you can't factor in, right? And when it comes to the actual valuation from a actual price to sales ratio, yes. Okay, but we can't always look at things as just black and white, especially this day and age. We've seen how many things have changed, especially since COVID.
Yeah.
The world is being reshaped as we speak.
By the way, I think that's a very valid point, Dalton. I think that's something that we need to make sure that people, they understand that. It's almost like the generation. I remember years ago, I'm dating myself. I'm 47. I'll be 48 in September of 2025, depending on when you're watching this show, right? But I remember back when I was in high school, and I graduated in high school in 1995.
Yeah.
Literally the time that the internet came out. And I remember a lot of people thinking about, like, is this going to take? Is it going to stay? What's going to happen? And obviously it revolutionized and changed. And so people, when they looked at businesses, there's a lot of, we'll call it the thinking out there that it's like, hey, things have been this way for a long time. It's going to change a little bit, but it's not going to change that much. And I think now with AI and with robotics and all of these other things, I think people need to confront the reality that things are going to significantly change in the way we live our life, number one. And number two, I think they need to be considerate of the fact that they need to get on board with areas that they can really profit and participate in some of this growth. So let's talk about the reshaping of the global economy and the planet and how things operate, and Palantir kind of being at the forefront of some of that.
Yeah, and Palantir is obviously a really hot name right now because they do have so much involvement when it comes to the federal government, having contracts with every government agency out there essentially. And this is part of the kind of idea when you're looking to invest and you're thinking about companies out there, especially when there's a lot of volatility in the markets. You really want to focus on, at the end of the day, regardless of what happens, who's really making the money, right? And who's involved in the certain headlines that pop up too. Israel, Iran. That's one kind of that is falls under their supervision. A lot of the stuff happening in LA with the riots and the protesters, that also kind of falls under their supervision as well.
Well, when you say falls under their supervision, what do you mean by that?
Well, they are a data company, right? And if you want to think about it, to put things simply, because everybody jokes that Palantir, like, they're a great company, but we don't know what they do. So it's very similar to AWS, Amazon Web Services, for the federal government, and really AI used in the military complex. And so that's kind of a roundabout way of looking at it and what they do. But so there's a lot of things that fall under their domain.
So let's talk about, I'm going to call it Operation Stargate, right? This is something that's massive. If people haven't heard of it, if you haven't heard of it, it's amazing. All of the things that are occurring here. But with Stargate, Palantir, like how what's the intertwining? What's your perspective of Stargate in general? Obviously, it's AI driven in many ways. There's a lot of comprehensive things happening that's going to really, we'll call it, take AI to the next level, which is very interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch. I think there's going to be a lot of ways to profit from it as well, which is great. But what are your thoughts about the Stargate project and what's happening there?
So $500 billion project in Texas, right? So Trump is kind of leading this, right? He worked this deal out with, I believe, SoftBank, in order to go out and create this new venture fund that's going to fund this AI data center project. And essentially what it is, it's going to be multiple data centers, but they're really going to house here in the US and also globally the data infrastructure for AI. And that's kind of what does that mean? Well, that means essentially anything that's going to fall under that AI kind of industry, it's all going to be routed through those data centers, which is really important to think about.
So here's a great simple way to do it. I call them tool takers.
Right.
And MLPs were tool takers for the oil and gas in a lot of industry, master limited partnerships, right? But it's like driving down the highway. And if you want to drive from California to Virginia, you want to go cross country, you got to go on a highway if you're going to drive, right? And a lot of those highways, you're going to pay tolls to be on it. So it's like, hey, you're in America, you're driving in America, but in order for you to get to where you want to go, you got to pay tolls on some roads to get there. And so what you're saying is Stargate, in a sense, is going to have a lot of what's happening from the AI space is going to be driven through Stargate.
Correct. And we don't know what exactly all of that will entail in the future, but that's the idea. Okay. And so there's several companies that are involved with that. NVIDIA, Oracle's really kind of leading the charge there.
Yep.
As well as Microsoft, and some of those other companies as well. But, there's a lot of people at that forefront and they really want to get involved, and everybody's talking about AI. That's just really becoming what most people consider the fourth industrial revolution.
I totally agree. And you got companies like OpenAI and then Microsoft themselves even having a stake in OpenAI. So it's almost like, what are we looking at here as far as what we're investing in,
right,
to participate in that? And I think if a lot of these companies are in a place where they see a lot of growth potential, which they do.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is going to change the landscape in many, many ways. And so I think we need to be thinking about not only how do we invest and get involved, but then also how are we going to be using this for our daily lives?
Sure.
And not getting too far into the weeds in things that don't actually help us.
Absolutely.
It's finding that balance, right?
It is finding a balance. And, you have to keep in mind, AI isn't going to be everything. But it's something that we need to evolve with along for the future. And it's something from an investment standpoint that you can allocate towards, while at the same time maintaining, investments in things that we know already, right? This is something we don't know. It's kind of the unknown.
Yeah.
That's why you have a trade-off between you're investing in the future and you're investing in things that you already are familiar with and that work now.
Yeah.
That could be real estate, that could be oil and gas. That could be certain private equity pieces, other segments of the market, but these are all pieces that you have to form together to really have a well-rounded portfolio.
Well, and I think you said it well, in anything that you do, you want to invest based on timelines, right? And so things strategically change, but they're not going to change overnight. it might take a year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years for full implementation of something. And that's time frame for transition. We talk a lot at the other firms and the firm that you're a part of. We talk a lot about the idea that money doesn't go away, it just moves. And so it's the idea of following where money is moving and participating in opportunity that that there's enough time frame to make money from that opportunity, so to speak, but then still there's enough meat on the bone that you can get out and profit and kind of look at reset the table and look at what's next, right? So let's talk about this. There's a lot of people who will kind of land the plane with some of these thoughts, but there's a lot of people that have bullish views on the economy. There's people that have bearish views on the economy. I mean, it's like no matter what network that you're on. I mean, I commentated for national media for 6 years, right? CNBC, Fox, Bloomberg. I was kind of a little bit agnostic when it comes to networks, but it's amazing to me that you can change channel to channel, and based on who's in office or what's happening and the political spin that they want to put on it, it can create a connotation of positive or negative. So let's just briefly, for those that are watching, listening, talk about what are our thoughts around bullish views, maybe for the end of the year versus bearish views for the end of the year, and then we'll kind of land the plane on some final thoughts.
Well, what I always say is the market and the economy are two different things. So, in terms of the market, I think we still will probably have some more volatility. There's something new that pops up every day.
Yeah.
In terms of the economy itself, bullish, with Trump at the helm and being in a place where we're going through some growing pains, obviously, to get things back on track.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think long term that it's going to be something that's positive overall for the economy.
Yeah. And I know we talked off air and you were talking about the idea of like, are we building the next internet or are we building the next tech bubble? And I think it's when you think about that tech bubble burst, a lot of people that are, even a little older than me remember back in the late 90s when that happened, right? I mean, so the internet comes out, it's a craze, everybody's excited, they're starting to figure out how to use it, it's ramping up fast, and then people kind of got over their skis a little bit and the tech bubble burst. And so hopefully, folks, investors have learned from that. Obviously, in the firm that you're working with, we do things a little bit differently, but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity regardless of what happens with markets to take advantage of.
I agree with that sentiment. I think that it's a different animal because with the internet and everything, with that bubble, is really more centralized around, hey, this is a service that people can use. Now this is I think with AI, it's so multifaceted. I think that there's going to be more of a lasting, really impact felt by the economy and the overall market.
I agree. So the last couple things, maybe sectors, areas to watch as far as to invest in, maybe AI infrastructure, cybersecurity, defense, energy. Is there anything else that you see, Dalton, that's should be in your view to invest in?
I think there's still, going back to stuff we've talked about before, but crypto, still being mindful of that, what's happening there. There's still a lot on the table, I think, in terms of, the use case for that. Dollar, obviously changes to the US dollar are going to impact it as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things on that forefront as well, but that would probably be the only thing I would add.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Dalton, listen, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing your thoughts. Dalton Helvey, portfolio manager, advisor at U.S. Private Wealth. And listen, as always, you want to be in a situation as you're taking a look at your investment portfolio, it's always a good time to step back, revisit, and really look at how can I improve what I'm doing? And that's really the key of what we're trying to say here. Most of you in the summertime, you're going to go on vacation, you're going to spend time with family, you're going to try and unplug and recharge, which is wonderful. May I encourage you to do the same with your portfolios. Unplug and recharge. What do I mean by that? By that I mean slow down in that week off or 2 weeks off or whatever it is where you're taking vacation. Revisit your investments, revisit your portfolio, honestly evaluate how are your positions doing. This might be a time where maybe you want to get a second opinion on what you're doing. By the way, if you have questions about some of the firms that we have and our team that helps some of the wealthy families, there's links on this page. leanonthewall.com is a great place to go to as well. But this is a good time to step back, slow down, revisit, and rethink what you are doing. Make sure that you're not so far into the weeds of the details of things that you don't not let yourself pull back to the macro of the opportunity that actually really exists. Okay? As economy as a whole, I think we're moving in the right direction. So get yourself out of the media weeds and learn to kind of refresh your mind, refocus, recenter, and make hopefully better decisions. And if you're with a firm that's helping you and you're uncertain and unstable, listen, probably a good idea to maybe get a second opinion on what you're doing. Great idea. If you had major health situations, you do it with your wealth. I strongly suggest it. A lot of great firms out there. Again, not biased, but we have a couple of firms that have done a great job of helping families, and you can find us, as I mentioned, with some of the info earlier. But listen, be blessed, be well, pay attention, invest well. We'll talk to you soon.